Bringing us home today is AdAlta, ASX code 1AD, with a market capitalization of around $13 million. Presenting today is Tim Oldham, CEO and Managing Director. AdAlta is a clinical stage drug development company headquartered in Melbourne in Australia. Tim, please take it away.
Thank you and good afternoon, everybody. My focus today will be on the steps that AdAlta is taking across two fronts of our business to use transactions to build and extend our clinical stage pipeline. Moving assets in the pharmaceutical industry through clinical development stages is the key to increasing value for our shareholders. If we can move forward through the disclosure and then on to the next slide, you can think about AdAlta in three different parts. The parent listed company is at its core a drug discovery business. It uses our proprietary iBody technology to go where traditional antibodies cannot in order to address debilitating diseases. And we're particularly focused on diseases where average survival is less than 5 years with standard of care treatment today. Once we move those programs through discovery and into the clinic, the capital required in order to continue to progress them becomes greater, and we need increasing focus. And so we've evolved our business model so that assets moving beyond phase 1 clinical trials into patient studies are now housed in therapeutic focused subsidiaries. The first is AdSolis, which is taking a new approach to fibrotic disease. And the second, which we launched just last quarter, is called AdSell, which is focused on our east to west cellular immunotherapy strategy. We realise value for our shareholders when we transact these assets with larger biopharmaceutical companies. But one of the benefits of AdSolis and AdSell is that we're able to take private investment directly into those subsidiaries, which also helps much earlier realise the inherent value and the underlying value of those assets. And we anticipate that with the transaction pipeline that we have coming, that there are significant opportunities to unlock what we believe is that underlying value not reflected in our share price today. If we can move to the next slide, please. We have, I guess, three reasons why I think AdAlta is worth looking at as a growth and admittedly speculative investment. The first one is that we have a really attractive current valuation given the fundamental assets sitting in our portfolio. At less than $15 million market capitalization, with one asset already through phase 1 and an interesting pipeline of development programs, we think that is a really attractive valuation relative to the underlying value, particularly of the lead asset. We have momentum accelerating towards demonstrating that with AD214 and realising a return on our investment in AD214 via our AdSolis subsidiary. And we've just launched our east to west cellular immunotherapy strategy, which will help us drive a near-term and more robust clinical stage pipeline beyond the single asset we have today in AD214. So moving on to the next slide, we have three strategies. AdSolis, taking a new approach to fibrotic disease. Our primary focus is realising the value of that lead asset by partnering either through out-licensing or co-development and asset financing in order to highlight the value of the asset and also to advance it into phase 2 clinical trials. Our second strategy, our east to west cellular immunotherapy strategy, involves providing a pathway for incredible Asian innovation in this field of cellular immunotherapy for solid cancers into Western regulated environments. And this involves in-licensing some of those assets into AdSell for ongoing development by us. And the third platform is continuing to drive novel iBody discovery through our discovery programs in AdAlta. This is able to be partnered early and/or we're building an inventory of assets that support additional partnering later on. You can see some examples of our existing collaborations at the bottom of this slide. So let me turn now to our AdSolis business. AdSolis is offering a new hope to patients with fibrotic diseases. On the next slide, you'll see that there are 500,000 patients around the world suffering from a debilitating, degenerative and fatal disease called idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. These patients are essentially living under a death sentence, and every day their symptoms basically represent an internal struggle to breathe freely. It's like drowning. It's not like being puffed when you're walking up the stairs. Bill Van Nierop talks eloquently about this, and you can see some of his commentary on this slide. Bill is one of the very, very few survivors of IPF, and he survived because he received a double lung transplant in 2021. So AdAlta's solution and AdSolis' solution is outlined on the next slide. We've invested 45 million Australian dollars to date to build a really strong value proposition. AD214 is a first-in-class molecule targeting a never-before targeted mode of action to address fibrotic disease. We've demonstrated that AD214 has antifibrotic properties in multiple animal models of fibrotic disease, not just in idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, that lead indication, which itself is a $4+ billion market, but also in other organ systems like kidney fibrosis, which is a $10 billion market, and emerging data in eye fibrosis and fibrotic cancers. We've successfully taken this molecule through phase 1 clinical trials. We've demonstrated that the dosing regimen we're using is clinically viable, and we have line of sight on an even more convenient subcutaneous route of administration, and we have really strong intellectual property protection. The next steps are to advance the current intravenous formulation into phase 2 clinical trials and to develop that patient-convenient subcutaneous formulation through phase 1 clinical trials. And AdSolis at the moment is seeking to raise the financing to achieve that through direct investment in AdSolis. That in turn will generate and realise the value that's been created in this asset by our existing shareholders. We have two strategies: to either directly out-license it to pharmaceutical companies or to attract asset-specific financing from investors who are specifically looking for exposure to phase 2 assets. The value of the asset is highlighted on the next slide. You can see that assets that are phase 2 ready, which is where AD214 is at the moment, are attracting upfront licensing deals in the vicinity of 25 to 50 million and more. Successfully getting them through a phase 2 clinical trial increases that upfront milestone into the order of 200 million plus. So you can see that both there's significant asset value today, those upfronts for the assets today, 3 to 4 times our current market capitalization alone, versus a 4 to 5 to even greater fold increase in the value if we were to successfully navigate through phase 2 clinical trials. So that's what we're up to with AD214 at the moment. Let me turn now on the next slide, to our AdSeller business. And the next slide really identifies the opportunity here. What we were trying to do is work out, what do we do post AD214? How do we build out a clinical stage pipeline? And we realized that our iBody technology is ideally suited for use in cellular immunotherapies. This is the use of living cells from a patient, engineered in a laboratory and given back to the patient as a living drug to treat cancer. We've had amazing outcomes in blood cancers, but the real opportunity is the 90% of cancers that are solid tumours, and we're just starting to see products being successful in this space. Now, on the next slide, you can see what we're trying to do with AdSeller. What are we trying to achieve? We recognise the iBodies are uniquely suited to these advanced cellular immunotherapies, and that we wanted to build a pipeline of partners that we could feed the iBody into. Secondly, we realised that the innovation that is happening in cellular immunotherapies is concentrated in Asia. More than around 50% of all companies developing these therapies are located in Asia, particularly China. More than 60% of clinical trials in this space are happening in China. And Australia has an incredibly capable ecosystem for manufacturing and delivering these products into clinical trials under a US or European compliant regulatory framework at a fraction of the cost that can be achieved in those markets. So our business model is in licensing these market-leading assets from Asia, building and establishing Western regulated manufacturing and obtaining that first Western regulated clinical trial data, which makes the asset much more attractive to Western pharmaceutical companies, significantly increasing the value of the asset for both ourselves and our partners from Asia. We would then on-license these assets to global distributors, potentially continuing to manage the manufacturing network ourselves. Next slide, please. I've talked really a lot about why we should do this in terms of the fundamentals of the ecosystem, the capabilities of the iBody. We've got a really rich pipeline of highly differentiated product candidates that we're working on. We're in diligence on over 15 assets at the moment. We're closing in on term sheets on 4 or 5 of those. This is a business model that's incredibly scalable. Each asset can be progressed through phase 1 clinical trials in a relatively short period of time, 2 to 3 years, at relatively modest cost, and then we can replicate that model over and over again. We have established partnerships with a venture capital firm based in Australia, but with extensive China cross-border experience to seed fund AdSell. We have an established manufacturing arrangement with Cell Therapies, Australia's leading contract manufacturer of these complex cell therapies, and that puts us in a great place for licensing these assets. The next slide shows the commercial attractiveness. Proof of concept asset transactions are significantly valuable. You can see the upfront payments here are comparable or better than what we see with assets that are already through phase 1, as we see with AD214. And on average, these cell and gene therapy assets are transacting at 3 times the value of biologic products. So if we move forward 2 more slides, this is a summary of our near-term milestones and objectives to really unlock the value of what we're doing. AdSolis is about out-licensing or co-development transactions. AdSell is about in-licensing these novel immunotherapies. While I can't talk specifically about when we will execute those transactions, I can say that we have advanced multiple conversations into the term sheet stage that enables us to do confirmatory due diligence. So we're very confident of the ability to execute transactions in both the AdSolis and AdSell ventures within the next near-term period, and we believe that will unlock significant value in the AdAlta share price. And the final slide is my closing slide. The contact details to find more from us are located here, and I'll be delighted to take any questions that we might have.
Tim, thank you. Yeah, we certainly do have some questions. The first one just relates to your partnerships. You just mentioned it, but how important to this business success are these partnerships? And I know it's tough to talk about, or some things you can't talk about, but are there any partnerships in the pipeline?
So partnerships are important for both our AdSolis and our AdSell businesses. Let me talk about AdSell first. Cellular immunotherapies are fearsomely complicated products. The outcome and the transformational outcomes for patients justify us embarking on that complexity, but we need specialist skills to do that. And our existing partners that we're working with to develop the AdSell business are experienced in 2 critical areas: cell therapies for manufacturing. Cell therapies are the only commercially approved manufacturer of these CAR T cell therapies or cellular immunotherapies in Australia. And Synthesis Bioventures are deeply experienced in cross-border transactions with China, having built and sold businesses there before. So those 2 pieces are really helping us pitch to assets coming out of Asia and China in particular, and have really helped us build that pipeline. On the AdSolis side, phase 2 trials are really expensive, much more expensive than we've spent on AD214 already. And we committed to our shareholders that they would not have to finance that step. In fact, that's not what our business is about. We committed that phase 2 would be financed by other people. So our partnership pipeline is there looking for the pharmaceutical companies that are ultimately going to take this through to commercialization and the later stages of clinical development. I can't talk in too much detail for competitive reasons around where we're up to, but I can say that there is really significant interest in AD214, including new interest that emerged at Bio in June in San Diego from companies that were just popping out of stealth mode. They were beneficiaries of the record amounts of venture capital that were raised in the US in 2023, now looking for a home. So these are brand new companies that have added additional competitive tension to our efforts to transact AD214.
Thanks, Tim. And an important aspect of your business is converting that Asian innovation in cellular immunotherapy for solid cancer into Western regulated markets. But can you elaborate on the current status of this?
Yeah, so we are diligencing around 10 assets, closing in on a lead 4 or 5 at the moment. And these are all assets that have already demonstrated clinical trial data in China. So they're incredibly de-risked. The companies we're working with, though, recognize that to unlock the value, and they're looking at the prototype transaction, which was done by a Chinese company called Legend with Janssen about 4 or 5 years ago that really put the Chinese cell therapy market on the map. They want to replicate those, but they can't do that without Western clinical data. The capital markets in China are worse than they are in Western markets today. And so they're really lacking the capital to do that, and they lack the resources and the networks to do that. I used to be the CEO of Cell Therapies, Australia's leading contract manufacturer of these cells. That gives us a really powerful network into the Australian cellular immunotherapy and indeed the global market. And that gives us advantages to augment and be a force multiplier for these Asian innovators to help them execute their goals. And by partnering with them rather than out-licensing from the get-go, what we're doing is enabling them to ride the increase in value without us having to pay significant upfront payments. Essentially, by conducting that phase 1 clinical trial in Australia, doing the tech transfer, we're buying into the asset by spending all our money developing it and enhancing it.
Tim, thank you. And just to wrap up, how significant is the master services agreement executed to establish Cell Therapies Proprietary Limited?
That agreement does 2 things or 3 things. Firstly, it gives us the capability to manufacture these complicated cell therapies when we successfully license them. Before that, it gives us access to the expertise at Cell Therapies to help us with due diligence and planning to make sure that the assets are indeed ready for Western markets and for US IND approval. And thirdly, it sends a signal to our Chinese partners that, yes, indeed, we have access to that network of capabilities in Australia, that we are an appropriate home for their asset.